Hi guys, welcome back to ModCons. Guess what? We are on location and we have two amazing guests with us today. Dr. David Starkey, historian, the historian. Tudor history is your forte. You've got numbers of books out. You are just, a TV presenter. You're the voice of reason.
I've never been called that.
Well, we like to think so. So yeah, absolutely an amazing day to have you today. And also we have Mark Littlewood. Popcorn. Wow, modern conservatism. He is the guru of modern conservatives. And also he was the director of IEA.
The Institute of Economic
Yes.
Affairs. But he's had a conversion. He realizes
Yes.
now more to life than economics.
There we go. Exactly. So, and not only that, you also are a pundit on lots of like news shows, and so you're very familiar faces with us today. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Great to be with you.
And what a day to actually join us. It was none other than the US elections. So Donald Trump has won. What do you think about that, guys? Tell me.
Didn't somebody say rejoice, rejoice? Rejoice, clearly, nobody is, at least nobody sensible, is over enamored with Trump's personality. But on the other hand, nor would any sensible person be much enamored with Kamala's intelligence, if indeed anybody could actually find it. And above all, it's what it represents. I think, and I'd be very interested in Mark's comment on this, it is the genuine victory of democracy, meaning what ordinary people want. This has become a term of absolute abuse. The meltdown of the commentariat here is because they hate democracy. They are contemptuous of the people. They've even invented a new yah-boo disgusting word, which is called populism, which means exactly the same as democracy, except that we stood democracy on its head. It's no longer the rule of the majority. It is the rule of law, which is, say, the rule of lawyers, and the triumph of minorities, minority rights, odd causes, the insanity of transgenderism over anything that's sensible. And it's an international movement, but it begins in America. Trump's election has blown this vast hole in it. And what we've got to do is to make sure that in the not too distant future, there's a similarly vast hole blown in it here, because the Labour Party, and Keir Starmer in particular, is the absolute quintessence. He is the concentrated, disgusting smelling extract of all of this stuff.
Wow.
You said I was a voice of calm and reason. I was endeavouring.
I like how you
endeavouring to demonstrate. But by the way, this is just tea.
And Mark, what's your?
Well, obviously, my thoughts and prayers are with David Lammy at this very difficult time. It is an earthquake. I agree with what David said. It is a quite stunning political comeback, actually. I mean, really remarkable. This man you would have thought was politically dead and buried some years ago. And
it makes Lazarus look rather understated.
Quite right. And it is definitely represents, for all Trump's flaws and bombastic nature, an outpouring of disquiet rage against the political establishment, who simply, I think, don't know what's hit them. On
either side of the Atlantic.
On either side, I agree. And I think this is going to mean quite a substantial reset for American politics. Not least, I think, actually, you might see a complete transformation in the Democratic Party, actually. How they adapt to what has just occurred.
They are now in survival mode.
They are in survival mode.
The fact that for the first time since George W. Bush, the president has not only won the Electoral College, but actually a majority of the whole electorate. And the figures are staggering. I mean, did you notice? Trump came within 10% of carrying New York, 5% of carrying New Jersey. I mean, interestingly enough, I gather the inner take on New Jersey is, of course, it's got a huge Jewish population, and the fact that the Democrats have thrown themselves utterly unthinkingly on side with the whole Palestinian intifada is clearly a matter of the most profound concern. But see, I think we've even left I think it's even bigger than what you say. I think that what Trump represents, what Trump's election represents, is also, it will be the final blow to this whole post-1945 international order. That is now falling to pieces round our eyes. I predicted, it's always interesting to look at how one, as it were, how one performs in terms of prophecy. On the day of the actual invasion of the Ukraine 2 years ago, I predicted that the existing international order would collapse into 2 or 3 separate blocks. That is exactly what has happened. It was totally predictable. And what is going to happen is Trump will force us to waken up to this fact. We've continued to chatter to ourselves. The chattering classes have said, oh, we represent, the West represents the international order. We don't. We really don't. There's a completely new world, even down to a new internet, to a new system of bank transfers emerging. And I think that the most terrifying thing from our point of view, now let's just come back to Britain, is that you have a Labour government which is entirely sold out to this old order. That with this notion of the rule of law, they are signed up absolutely hook, line and sinker to the whole agenda of diversity, equity and inclusion, to the whole agenda of minority rights, and they're signed up also to the idea of international law, which Trump regards legitimately as the most. America's never signed up. It never signed up to the International Court of Justice, and he's just going to kick the thing away. And you have a government, that, as we saw with the Chagos Islands, whose entire raison d'etre, because Starmer, doesn't have a brain, he's got a kind of mechanical clock that ticks off legal procedure. I mean, to understand Starmer, you've got to understand he is the kind of man who reads the small print at the end of a mobile phone contract. And his view of morality and politics is the mind of the small print of a mobile phone contract. And this is why he's so hopeless. The total inflexibility, the total inability to read the situation. So, I mean, it is wonderful. There is the house of cards, isn't there? It's as though suddenly the entire pack of cards have been thrown in the air. We know it's going to come down in strange patterns. We have no idea what they will be.
I would think the first thing to look for is whether this is the beginning of the end of climate lunacy, actually.
Yes, he said instantly, I'm going to frack, doesn't he? He said exactly.
Drill, baby, drill.
Drill, baby, drill.
So I wonder whether, which has been part of the international order, that we all need to get together in some grand international.
COP24 or whatever.
Yeah, it was actually, I got more and more furious about it. I think the last one was COP26, if I recall. And every pompous dignitary was saying, this is the last chance to save mankind.
I'm afraid, led by our king.
Oh, yeah.
And that there is again, this has the most extraordinary consequences for institution after institution.
Yeah, and it's not the danger is that people like His Majesty the King treat this as an uncontroversial area. It's not a settled uncontroversial area. But when they were saying this is the last chance for mankind, I mean, I sort of rolled my eyes and said, well, at least we can agree then there's no need for COP27, right? You'll either succeed or you won't succeed. There's no point in coming back to the table. But I wonder whether that actually unravels really quickly now. You can't see it.
Well, look at the collapse of the collapse of the German economy.
Yeah.
That Germany was built on essentially cheap Russian energy, cheap Russian energy, and absolutely open access to the Chinese market for cars. Both of those have gone.
Yeah.
And you are seeing the alleged powerhouse of Europe, now the worst performing economy in Europe. It's this astonishing, in a very short time. I mean, there's a general theory of change, which is called the Kuhnian theory of change, which is called the paradigm shift, that things go on for a very, very long time, long actually after our explanatory patterns and understanding patterns have been shown to be wrong by facts. In the same way, the Ptolemaic theory of the universe, it's Earth-centric as opposed to heliocentric, continues long after the evidence, and you had to adjust it, and you introduce all sorts, and then suddenly, like that.
Yeah, suddenly it stops.
So change doesn't happen gradually. you have these cataclysmic moments. And we are so built into a progressivist notion of history in which we imagine everything is going little dot, dot, dot. I mean, and because I'm so ancient, I mean, I see the world that I was born in 1945 was very little different from the world in which this flat that we are sitting in. This flat was built in 1890, and it's then very heavily modified with the introduction of electricity 10 years later. And when these decorations were put up in about 1905, you had electric light, you had the telephone, you had typewriters, you had very fast trains, you had telegraph. And the world I was born in 45 was basically just like that. We were nudging into nuclear power, yes. We just about got antibiotics, yes. We still didn't have a proper vaccine for polio, which is why I got a rather sticky leg. But suddenly, this accelerating pace of change, the third industrial revolution, the electronic industrial revolution, which is taken us in again, I think when I first filmed, to do what we are doing now, there would have been 10 people in this room, and they would have all been subject to severe trade union interference. I remember when I was first filmed, that camera had film in it. And there were cries going up saying, air in gate. And there was some great thug called a grip. And his job was just to pick fucking things up and put things down. And if you touch, you may get your hands stuck. And Thatcher comes along and all is light, and great thug disappears. Again, just almost like throwing a light switch.
I think the intriguing thing here is that all of this progress over generations, and I think this going back to the Trump phenomenon, people are sort of seeing around them, whether it's progress in medicines or technologies, and they're then scratching their heads saying, well, why aren't we colossally richer? You know, why
we are.
But the
let me tell you.
But not over the last 15 years.
No, indeed.
But crushingly disappointing.
Yes, but remember, up to that point, the elevation of ordinary living standards
was spectacular.
Is utterly spectacular. It's completely unprecedented in human existence.
Clearly, over my lifetime and over your lifetime, David, there has been colossal material progress for the masses. But what has unraveled is, I think, basically over the last 15 years. I mean, let's just take the global financial crisis as roughly the sort of start point. That in the Western world has ground almost to a halt. So improvements in living standards in the last 15 years have been extraordinarily modest, and it wouldn't be really much of an exaggeration to say they've flatlined. Basically, it's 0%. And this is just a theory, I'm no psychologist, but I wonder, going all the way back to 1945, whether we have psychologically got ourselves into a situation in which we assume things will improve by, let's say, 2 or 3% a year, to put a number on it.
Which, remember, if it's compound interest,
is fantastic. This is
what we forget. If it's compound interest, it is utterly transforming.
You're doubling the economy every 20 or so years.
Exactly.
But what's happened is that escalator we were on, and we expected to continue moving up, has stalled. And this, I think, is what's led people to be furious. I mean, it's not that millions of us have suddenly been plunged into poverty. There is some poverty, but not colossal absolute poverty at all in the West. It's that the escalator has stopped for 15 years, and people assumed that we would be on an ever upwards trajectory of material progress.
And of course, it's also coincided with an absolute rupture in two different, if you like, moral and climates of opinion. There's been this utterly radical divide between the elite and the non-elite, between the university educated and the non-university educated. And what happened, the figures are now absolutely clear. The numbers have been crunched for Trump's victory. It is the victory of those who did not go to university. There's an absolute inverse proportion between education and Trump's vote. And this, of course, leads to the elite class to sneer. But you know what? It was recognized, switching out of this discussion, going back to one of the foundational texts that we all think about, In George Orwell's 1984, he recognizes that it is the elite who are consumed by the educated who are consumed by stupid ideas. That the elite of the Communist Party, the elite of the Socialist Party have always been the educated. And you get the rage in George Orwell of realizing that these are the people who are carried away by the worship of Stalinism, the worship of Big Brother, and that the hope is, as it were, in what are called in 1984 the proles. And this has been demonstrated to be the fact, and it's why you founded Popcom, why I become an enthusiastic participant in it, because genuinely, and democracy really does act as an anchor of sanity.
Yeah.
The ordinary person whose mind is uncontaminated by absurd theories is a better judge of things than fanatical specialists. No ordinary person believes that you can, as it were, that with a little bit of forethought, a man can grow a cervix, you know, which was, I can't remember, was that the opinion of Starmer or was it the opinion of Lammy? No ordinary person, especially somebody who's had a bit of sex at some point in their lives, which may indeed exclude both Starmer and Lammy, would ever think of such an absurd. You need to be very, very educated, as you were in the Middle Ages, to believe in transubstantiation. You need to be very educated to think that by saying hoc est corpus, a bit of bread and a bit of wine turn into flesh and blood and bleed. You've got to be very clever to make to have such stupid thoughts.
So there is a sort of common sense revolution, basically, rather than the sort of elegant design theories.
And also just to recognize that you can't change the world by words. The problem with most academic education, and I speak as somebody who had far too much of it and, and inculcated far too many people into it, it exaggerates the importance of words. The proper use of words isn't to conjure with them. I mean, look at this government's prattling about growth. It does every single thing it can to throttle growth by imposing taxation and regulation. And somehow it says, because we believe in growth, it's going to happen. It is fundamentally magical thinking. It's like pronouncing hoc est corpus on the economy. The proper use of words, as the great philosophers, particularly people like David Hume thought, is you have to connect them with things. Yeah. And the left is profoundly reluctant to connect with things. The essence of being a conservative is to recognize the hardness, the intractability, the awkwardness, the non-fitting into pattern nature of reality. You know, the famous action of one of the greatest of conservatives, Dr. Johnson, when he confronted Bishop Berkeley's theory that the world didn't exist except in the mind of God. And he said, well, it's very easy to refute it. And he kicked a stone. And it's that hard hitting of reality. And what I think Trump's victory is, it's the equivalent of a huge splatter in the face of this theoretizing, word-based, magical thinking left.
Yeah, well, I guess that's kind of the motivation towards Brexit, right? And the fact that Tony Blair wanted everyone to be educated. That's right. Because he wanted to institutionalize.
And indeed, one of the things that's right, we can take it even further. That's a brilliant sort of way of taking it on. Once we started saying at least 50%, and we do have 50% of the age cohort going to university, they study absolutely useless degrees. And we have entire, hundreds of thousands of young people who have studied some sort of silly sociology or some sort of media studies, and we've to find something for them to do. So we invent things like whatever it's called, human resources departments, and they spend their entire lives stopping anybody else doing anything useful. Enormous numbers of jobs are absolutely not simply useless, they actively interfere with productive economic activity. And all our regulators, I mean, not all of them, but see, what again is striking, everybody says, oh, we do need regulation. Yes, we do. Look at Grenfell. Building industry regulation files are several tens of thousands of pages. The more complicated you make it, the easier it is to avoid. If you have simple, direct, fact-based, with proper scrutiny regulation. It doesn't need vast structures. You need a relatively small team of inspectors, but they have to be actually trained on the ground and doing something, as opposed to people just pushing paper around. There is a really interesting theory of the consequences of the oversupply of graduates. So, I mean, at the moment, it looks as though many of our universities will go bankrupt, which is a consummation devoutly to be wished for. Because the other thing is, most of these non-jobs, insofar as they exist, are going to be rendered totally redundant by AI.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
as I hope a lot of regulation will be.
Absolutely.
Even if it's complicated, AI might very well be able to say, actually, this is the maximum extension you can put on your greenhouse in your back garden under the present planning laws, rather than having 150 different planning officials coming down and disagreeing. But I think the point you make about Brexit is another interesting one, is what we're generally seeing, if you can piece together this trend, and I agree with David that the cards have all been thrown into the air, so it's quite difficult to piece together the whole mosaic. But in essence, the ordinary people in Western democracies are saying the system isn't working.
And they're right.
And they are right.
Absolutely
to say the system
right.
isn't working. And I mean, and it's sort of an unambiguous assertion. It's not sort of, oh, well, you know, I think taxes are a little bit too high. Could you tweak them downwards? Or I think that sort of, you know, that regulation might be a little bit too tight in some areas. Can you liberalise it? It is a scream against the system. And I don't think the system can withstand it. So I'm rather with David. I think that this is, you know, an epoch-changing moment. There's not a single moment, but we're in a period of, I think, a complete realignment of politics and
international
relations. Yeah.
So what does that actually mean, I guess, for us in the UK now? Like, what does that, what was, I know you said the cards are in the air, so you don't know, but you must have some sort of direction that you think will sort of.
Well, I think that, I mean, it's David's thinking on this that's really largely inspired me. We need a complete institutional reset, that we have allowed to grow up a whole plethora of institutions, lawmaking bodies, independent arm's length bodies, you know, independent at arm's length, because that's sort of the best way to have experts running the country rather than democratic accountability. And there's a plethora of this, right? So at first blush, I guess to your average voter who doesn't spend all of his time thinking about constitutional matters, these don't necessarily seem connected, but my assertion would be that they are. Yeah. We have the Equalities Commission and the Equality Act. We've had the creation of the Supreme Court, the abolition of the Law Lords. We have the Climate Change Committee, enormously more powerful than the Environment or the Energy Secretary, this committee. We have the Office for Budget Responsibility, which, it's my view that Richard Hughes, the head of that office, actually, I've kind of spoiled the punchline here. I often ask people, can you name the head of the Office for Budget Responsibility? Nobody can, but it's Richard Hughes. I've given you the answer to the question. Has more power over fiscal policy than Rachel Reeves. I mean, the Chancellor... It's
a competition between him and the Governor of the
Bank of England.
But neither of whom we can remove.
Exactly.
Despite the fact that it is perfectly clear that the economic decisions of the OBR and the Office for whatever the sale of debt is called, which is a bit of the Branch of England, and the Branch of England Monetary Committee have been absolutely disastrous.
And you get disastrous politicians because you can remove them. Yes. That's the key difference.
As the last election demonstrated. But I think the peculiarity that we find ourselves in England, in Britain, is that we've got a kind of frozen politics at the moment. That our election, the last election, the July election, sort of got out of sync. So the key issue was, quite rightly in my view, to throw the pseudo-Conservative Party out. Because what the pseudo-Conservative Party had done was completely to continue the pattern that Mark has been talking about, which was really unleashed fully in 1997 by the incoming New Labour government, with devolution on the one hand and the independence of Bank of England on the other. But the Conservatives simply continued that. One of the bodies that you talked about, that's to say the OB we are was set up by the incoming Conservative government. The reason that the Climate Change Committee is so devastatingly powerful is that Theresa May was stupid enough to legislate in 2015 the binding net zero target of 2050. And what that does, if you couple that with the unleashed judges of the Supreme Court, our actual fuel policy is now determined by lawyers. It's completely demented. Lawyers rule whether or not we can actually frack, whether or not we can drill for oil. In the same way, would you believe it, the Equalities Act actually legislated into English law the Marxist labour theory of value. And you now have relative wage rates between pears and apples, between women cleaners and male dustmen, set by a court of law. And you bankrupted Birmingham, the second largest authority in the country on those grounds. And you're about to bankrupt Next and most of the retail sector. It is completely demented. But the great priority in the general election of this year was not unlike America, to attack the system, because there was no candidate that presented himself like Trump as the enemy of the system. You simply had a lukewarm support of the system, which was the Conservative Party, which was discredited, and an enthusiastic participant in the system, which was the Labour Party. And unfortunately, the operation of first past the post here, with the multiplicity of political parties, has given us 5 years of a party commanding 2/3 of the seats in the House of Commons, an unshakable majority, with at the same time having only been elected by, depending on how you do the stats, 1 in 5 of the electorate, or just over 1/3 of the people who actually voted. But there is nothing constitutionally we can do about that. Our task has got to be to explain to people what has gone wrong, because Mark and I, and like most of us, I think, on the right, we are not contemptuous of the electorate. The left is contemptuous of the electorate because they know it doesn't like their ideas. So they have to spend the whole of their time talking about misinformation or foreign intervention, or politics is basically too complicated.
Or badging any complaint as racist,
indeed,
sexist,
and all of that. But what we've got to do, we've got to be bold, we've got to be brave, and we've got to persuade, and we've got to explain. And it's an enormous task, but it's one that I look forward to. The good things that I've done in my life have all been an aspect of being a teacher. The key thing, and again, there was once a fundamental connection between democracy and education and mass education. Our mission is to recover that and to explain to people what's happened and what they've got to do to put it right. And if we on the right are able to do that, the whole of this horror will be swept away. But what I also hope, and again, I don't want to sound too preachy, we've been attacking people for being preachy, but I hope we can do it without violent rupture. The thing that worries me profoundly about Trump is the element of, let's tear it all down, of putting a bonfire.
Well, that's also what worries you about Farage.
And it's what worries me about Nigel. It's what worries me about people whom I enormously admire, like Matt Goodwin. That there is a certain flavour of bonfire. You know, yesterday was Bonfire Night as well as election night, and there is that sense of put it all on the bonfire. What we've managed to do in Britain, and I think the reason again, I mean, let's look back at the transfer of power here at the general election. It was, as always, the most orderly. Everybody trots along to the polling station. You put your little cross on a bit of paper, you fold it and you put it in the box, and you have a polite word with both the red and the blue people, and even the funny yellow ones and green ones, sitting there very anxiously with their little registers, and you're politer to one than the others, but there we are. And you all go back and you sort of feel you've done something. And then the following morning, there's the result. And the removal vans, if there's a change, come to Downing Street, the back door, and out goes one prime minister, and at the front, and in comes another one, and that's that. But what is extraordinary about the left, they don't understand that. They don't understand that their triumph wasn't a triumph. It was simply the operation of a several hundred years of political convention. And of course, they hate political convention. They're contempt. I mean, Starmer openly says he is contemptuous of Parliament. And we see now, every time there's a government announcement, it's been made in about 45 different places rather than Parliament. Yes. Again, the whole business of chucking the hereditaries out of the House of Lords. Yes, but these are little constant chips away against the legitimacy of tradition. And you keep on. Again, the whole of New Labour was that process. We are a new country. But as you chip away that automatic consent. You chip away democracy depends on the loser's consent. Mm. The orderliness depends on that. But it's all rooted in these traditions, in these assumptions. And if you get the desire for year zero, whether it comes from the right or the left, that goes. We're already seeing, we haven't talked about this, and this is another much less welcome aspect of what's been going on in America. We're seeing here and on both sides of the Atlantic, the increasing politics of the street, the demonstrations. And this terrifies me. There is the risk of Weimar. Mm-hmm. And we've been able to avoid this. And everything, the thing that's actually good about this iteration of Trump, you look at those vast rallies. If you remember the one in Madison Square Gardens, everybody was saying, oh, this is the new Hitler. Nonsense. But what Trump has managed to do, and I think particularly with people like Musk and Vance, what he's managed to do is, as it were, both to tap on the emotion that generates street protest, but actually to channel it into the electoral process.
Yes, it's even a peaceful.
And it's become very different. I think here we're completely failing to do that. And there's this wonderful thing in what is still one of the most brilliant analyses of our politics, which is Walter Bagehot on the Constitution, the description of Britain as a crowned republic. And he was making the comparison between, in the 19th century, the 1860s, there was only one other country, remember, that actually had representative government apart from us. All Europe are absolute monarchies of one form or another. The only other form of representative government was America, the great, relatively new Republic of America. What he says there is the peculiarity and the miracle of our system is it's actually a republic, but it's got a crown at the head. Why is this a good idea? He said, well, if you look across in America, government's boring because it's just people in frock suits doing tedious things. Here we have the monarchy, we've got glitz, we've got glamour, we've got something that can attract the people. What I think, we mock American politics, we mock the rah-rah quality, the funny hats and whatever. But what they've done, they've invented a form of ceremonial participation of their own, which makes their politics exciting. Again, everybody's been going, isn't it terrible, all the awful passions that have been aroused in America? But you know what? This election, there's been a genuine choice.
Yeah.
And there's been you have this extraordinary sense of a very wide participation in politics. Whereas what did we have at the last election? The whole thing was an awful wet rag. We had the second lowest turnout since the franchise. Since the full democratic franchise, since you were given voting, given voting rights in the wake of the First World War, it was about a 60% turnout, an absolutely awful campaign in which the Labour Party was simply able to lie its way to power, and both sides were denounced by the IFS as effectively not touching one of the single issues that they needed to touch.
So this is what needs to change, right? I think the Conservative proposition needs to be about this reset of our rules, our institutions, our approaches. It's not quite as simple as saying let's look at every single institutional and constitutional change since 1992 and just delete them. It's not quite that simple, but that's a fairly good way of roughly explaining it.
That's the
basic
that is
gist of
the
it.
fundamental proposition, because we
That's
did.
almost bonfire, though.
No, it's
When you
not.
keep everything
No,
it
it is the removal of the wrong. You see, everybody's, again, the whole Blairite myth was that all change is good. It isn't. There can be bad change. There is, again, progressivism. That is the belief that everything gets better all the time and you have to change things all the time. We can now see is actually the enemy of progress. That's why we were talking about this sudden throttling of living standards as far as ordinary people is concerned. There's been fast change, but clearly some aspects of it have been very bad indeed. And we've got to recover the ability to discriminate. And you see, when you look at the radical left, that's progressivism. It's the belief in change for its own sake. What we have got to do is, we've got to recover what actually the word conservative means. It means, but you know what? It means conserving. It means recognizing that it's often a very good idea not to change them. But you see, that everybody then says, oh, that's stultifying or whatever. It isn't, or it needn't be. Or in fact, very often, the point is, it's not whether you have change, it's whether you have the right sort of change. And if you like, going back right to the origins of our the vast cultural revolution that's created the modern world, of which England, Britain was the absolute epicenter. It goes back really to the late 14th century with what we call this thing, the Renaissance. Was talking about the rebirth of the learning, the knowledge and whatever, of the fact that there's an earlier, for a long time, greater civilization than ours lying behind our own culture. And it's when Chaucer, the founder poet of English, and indeed, in many ways, the inventor of the English language, he's only 600 years old, when he has encountered the world of Italy, he's been there as a diplomat and trader and all the rest of it, and he comes back to England and he's thinking about it, and he writes a poem about it, and there's this extraordinary 4 lines in it. And they're as follows. I'll give you a kind of very rough modern translation. Just as each year out of the old cold ground comes the new corn, so from old books new learning springs. And that's what we mean by a classic. It's the thing in which the past fertilizes the present. And what I would argue is that the miracle that England enjoyed, and it is England with the addition of Scotland in the with union in the 18th century, is that we had a set of political and social arrangements which uniquely facilitated the beginnings of economic growth and transformation, which benefited everybody. And they were firmly grounded in the 2 ideas of representation and of consent. And what we've done with the changes of New Labour is we've deliberately devalued those ideas. So the law is now alien. The law is seen, for the first time, I think, really, in British history, as an alien force, which represents alien values and is resented.
I think it's even worse than that we've allowed to grow up.
You're not telling me I'm being, you're not telling me I'm understated.
Typically understated, David, typically understated.
Maybe I'm the voice of reason.
I knew it.
We've allowed to grow up a bureaucratic class who are not hardwired to have incentives to improve the lot of ordinary people. That's the essential problem. So the priorities, subconscious perhaps, of the bureaucratic class are not a lot. Maybe it's even conscious.
I mean, sorry. Let's just, and then you come back on this. Look at what what this Labour Party is doing. It says that it believes in public service. What it actually believes in is the public sector. At every stage, all the rewards of these huge pay rises have gone to the public sector. the moment there's any attack on pensions, oh, the pensions of the public sector must be spared. Can we all remind ourselves, and anybody watching this program, that our Prime Minister, in the role that you never knew he held, did you? No idea he was Director of Public Prosecutions, but in that role, he accumulated a pension so huge that it has to have an entire separate Act of Parliament devoted to protecting it. And just, it's jaw-dropping. Again, national insurance contributions shoot up for every employer apart from the state. I mean, even within the health service, the fact that poor old GPs are self-employed means they're expected to carry increased national insurance contributions. And so, but I think it's self-conscious. I think that the Labour Party used to be the party of the working class. It's become the party of the bureaucratic class.
Exactly.
And it is, as you see, with the entire self-righteousness of Starmer, that it's self-conscious. It is like the old Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, the bureaucratic class was called the nomenklatura, and they gave themselves all of these privileges. And that's, again, the symbols are very clear. The showered gifts from the Lord Ali. Can you imagine a man letting somebody else buy his wife's clothes? I mean, and then working out that he could somehow justify it by repaying £6,525, 14 pence, out of the tens and tens of thousands that he'd received, and somehow that would write the debt.
And I think the wider problem with the bureaucratic class is that they are now attempting in a whole range of different ways to order the lives of ordinary people, whether this is about your
resting more lightly on your life. Do you remember?
That's right. We're going to tread more lightly.
Tread more lightly. It's so it's
whether it's
the boot on the going back to order, the boot on the face of humanity forever.
So whether it's greenery or diversity, equality, inclusion, training, or whatever, and it's completely out of sync with the broad mass of people's thinking.
Which is why you have to invoke the law to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Why you have to have a two-tier system of law. And all of these things are profoundly dangerous. And the thing that's striking is they're all profoundly anti-democratic. But we've perverted the meaning of the word democracy because we've incorporated these fantastical ideas of the rule of law within it. We've incorporated these fantastical ideas of international law and all the rest of it. And this is why, as I had to go back, but I want to reiterate the point, it's why we've had to invent this new pejorative term, populism. And so every time you hear somebody denounced as a populist, you instantly know this is the bureaucratic class trying to strike somebody down. It's the new equivalent of racist or classist or anti or transphobe, or above all, Islamophobe. It's the sheer unthinking crassness. In other words, they live in a totally different world.
And not just on wealth, on their priorities.
Well, actually, when you were talking about Trump's rallies and things, I was thinking that it seems that when I've been knocking on doors, a lot of people say,
you've been doing that?
Yes, I do.
You are brave.
I'm pretty bold.
You look surprisingly unscarred.
I know, I'm made of tough stuff, but a lot of people say, politics isn't for me, or I don't engage, I never vote, and they say it with either pride or they're just kind of completely disengaged. And with the rallies and stuff, it's really interesting to see across the pond how fired up people are. Whereas here we see people who are either kind of impassioned by either fringe topics or international situations going on. Those are the things that seem to kind of spur people on. It doesn't seem to be the issues at home, like the kind of mainstream issues at home. And when people are, they tend to be called by the Prime Minister far-right thugs or whatever that might be. What do you think is the next step to actually get people more engaged in politics and not be kind of cast aside? Or
we've talked about education, haven't we? Because I always believe in teasing people, and they've been talking about reducing the voting age to 16. I'm inclined rather to welcome it. But to say what we have to do in that case, and we would find it very hard to resist, is to have a proper programme of civic education in schools, to which all shades of opinion have equal access. And they dropped that idea like a shot. But we need something like that. We've also got to recognise that there are fundamental problems with the direction in which our politics has gone. The thing that used to arouse great crowds, was the centre of national feeling, was the monarchy. The monarchy has gone off in the very strangest direction. It's moved from the centre of our politics into the far margins, and there is nothing that's gone into its place. And I am instinctively and intellectually a monarchist, but it's not working. It really is not working. And it's very difficult, to be honest, to explain why the British monarchy exists. I can see it save this residual symbol of the normal way we do things, the embodiment of our historical traditions, but it's not doing it in any kind of active way. Whereas, and it is very difficult for them. Again, let's try to understand this, because we are not a single nation. If you actually look, for example, in the Netherlands, the striking thing is, look at the colours of the Dutch football team. What are the colours of the Dutch flag? The colours of the Dutch flag are red, white, and blue, like virtually every other flag, but the stripes in a different order. But the colours of the Dutch football team are orange, from the House of Orange. And you can have a very much simpler form of symbolism. But when you are this we're really a pre-modern state. But in fact, our strength was exactly that we were the high, extraordinary flexibility and whatever of it. It's why we've been able, again, it's one of the reasons why we've been able to accommodate mass immigration without the vast social tensions that it's, and there have been social tensions, but much less radical ones than elsewhere. But I think we are going to need a kind of reimagining of our politics.
I agree with that. But I would just add to it, I don't want to make it sound as if I'm advocating for apathy. I'm not quite advocating for apathy, but I am reminded of that great story of the chap who'd applied for some sort of job, and he'd listed amongst his interests politics as one of his interests, and it was some public affairs or current affairs job. And they said, "Well, I'm delighted that you've listed politics as an interest. Are you interested in politics?" "Yes, yes, I am." "All right," he was asked, "well, can you name the Chancellor of the Exchequer for me then, please?" To which he said, "Well, no, I've got no idea." And he said, "Well, you said you were interested in politics." He said, "Yes." I said, "I was interested, not obsessed." and I think part of it is I actually look forward to a world in which people don't obsess about politics, in which they can basically go about their day-to-day lives. They take their civic duty of voting, perhaps seriously, but otherwise roughly go about their ordinary business and pursue their own dreams and their own ambitions.
Mark, you're now reverting. You're going back to the IEA, because that is very good when politics is working.
No, I agree with that.
Politics is not working. I mean, let me remind you.
A sign of our success, though, would be to return to a state of affairs of
That's
vacuum.
exactly right. Yeah. But we're at one of those moments of huge change and transition. I also really do think that an involvement and an interest in politics is a kind of social duty. Again, as society becomes more diverse, we need things that bind us together, and that kind of common act, which I described, that process of going out to vote, the fact all classes of people rub shoulders with each other, and again, I was talking about the fact that I'm very old and therefore remember vividly back to my parents' generation, both of whom were born in 1907, and just looking through the surviving papers and whatever that my father left, you're just struck by the number of organizations they belonged to before the welfare state, because you had to have self-help. And the welfare state and the deliberate provision, particularly in the NHS and whatever, of care, all shifting into the hands of a bureaucracy, things that people, you have
destroyed the cooperative movement.
It destroyed the cooperative movement. It destroyed the whole business. It sounds macabre, but you'd bury old clubs because you'd all to shove in the odd penny or two to pay for a decent funeral. You had forms of self-help and self-insurance, and all of this is thinned out.
And crucially, this was based on
mass membership of political parties.
This was based on local knowledge as well, though.
Local economies.
So you would sort of know who was swinging the lead and who was genuinely in need, not by filling in a 482-page form with 197
but knowing about your
variables, but knowing about your neighbour and all of that has been eviscerated. So civil society has been undermined by the
state. The state has consumed civil society. But you see, I think that again, I guess an awful lot of this is going to go into very sharp reverse. I mean, clearly globalization is coming apart. Quite clearly, forms of economic and all forms of resilience are going, actually, I think, to emphasize the local very, very much more. The jobs that are going to survive AI are jobs you actually do on the spot. Our new aristocracy are going to be plumbers. Aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, all the jobs that people get paid stupid amounts of money for can be done terribly easy by machines.
We've done a better job of replicating the human brain than we have of replicating the human hand.
Yes, it was much harder to do.
20, 30 years ago, I can remember. Do you remember the old TV show Tomorrow's World?
Yeah.
Which it projected this way before your time. It would project some unbelievable technology that might transform our lives in 10 or 15 years' time. Nearly always got it completely wrong, by the way. But nevertheless, we were asked to imagine a society in which we had robot maids and robot plumbers, and whilst we were sitting around being lawyers and historians and accountants and the like, could actually go completely the other way.
I think
white-collar jobs are going.
I think historians will survive. He said,
they probably will.
He said boldly. But I mean, regiments, all ordinary lawyers will vanish.
And accountancy.
Or accountancy will almost completely vanish. I mean, you can just go through the list of bureaucracy. Who needs it? I mean, do you know? Right, I bought this flat back in May of last year. I extended the lease in July. 3 months later, we received a letter from the land registry saying we hope to be able to deal with this. This is in July 2023. We hope to be able to deal with this by the 15th of July 2025.
2 years.
And it's demented. Yeah. It's completely demented. It is simply checking a record and re-entering a record. Yeah. It is nothing more sophisticated.
And I think what's also in stark contrast now is in the private sector, and especially the younger generation, but frankly all of us, are now hardwired to instant gratification. And I don't see that as a criticism. Yeah. No. I mean, I decided I wanted to read up a bit after hearing you in Oxford the other week on Disraeli. So I actually thought, I flipped open my phone, went to Amazon, ordered the best book on Disraeli. It arrives the next morning. Yeah.
Why I
didn't get a note saying
in the library. It's actually cheaper to buy the book on Amazon than it is to travel up.
So unbelievable. So if you like, in the private sphere of our
but the state is
you can order any food you want if you live in it, and it will arrive within 45 minutes.
And what all of this does, and why it's so important we understand this, the whole of the mystique of the administrative class is now hanging by a single thread. Being a bit of a Marxist about it, economic and technological developments they are surely going to destroy this, as the invention of frame knitting destroyed the stock, all the classic things of the Luddites. The new Luddites.
Henry Ford put the blacksmiths out.
The new Luddites are going to be the bureaucracy who will cling like grim death. I mean, why is it that the NHS still uses fax?
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
And fax I mean, can everybody just register? I mean, when did you look at?
I didn't realise they existed anymore.
And presumably they have. Do you remember those bizarre bits of kind of toilet paper, surface toilet paper you put in them? I mean, you'll have never seen one.
I remember they used to have to go to the newsagents.
That's right. And you put this roll in, and it came out, as it were, with all the sheets connected up, and you chop them up with a pair of scissors. And of course, it could never lie flat. I remember the day.
It was very cutting edge.
Oh, it's literally cutting edge. But they all sat there with an uncomfortable sort of curve on them, and the print faded within about 10. If you let it on your desk,
it disappeared like invisible ink.
It disappeared like it. The NHS is still using it.
Incredible.
I think we really do need to start talking about the Ludditism of the public sector. And again, the restrictive practices of train drivers.
Yeah.
The London Underground lines, almost all of the new ones are designed to operate without drivers.
Yeah.
And instead, these people being paid Faxa Sadiq Khan and whatever, I mean, up to 100,000 a year. It is a monstrous and disgraceful way.
And the other thing, interesting example on the train drivers, but again, it goes to the bureaucratic class and the public sector side of the economy claiming virtue as well. I can remember, was it the issue about we're going to try and cut back the number of train guards, we don't need them anymore, and they all went on strike claiming that they worried about my safety, but they weren't worried about their job.
Again,
I said, it's okay, I'm willing to risk it. I'm willing to risk it, actually. I'm willing to risk it. Thank you very much for your concern about my safety, but I'm willing to take the chance. So it's all of it is this parade of virtues. So, I mean, these are hugely, I think, exciting changes. I think that the sort of ideas that David has developed and my organisation is running with are going to win. And I actually think,
the facts are on our side.
Exactly, the facts are conservative.
These gigantic changes are on our side. Yeah. But what I'm terrified of is the changes could equally bring about radical revolutionary change. I think revolutions are invariably catastrophic. The violence of revolution and simply the uprootedness of revolution. I mean, you look in France at the moment, remembering France since the revolution, we're up to 5 republics. And before that, you had 2 monarchies and 2 empires. In 200 years, you have had 9 radically different political systems. And if you look in France, the last election in France yielded a result very similar to ours. So with 2 parties round about the 30% mark and a group of others round about the 20% mark. They're in a permanent political crisis, whereas our system was able to deliver a smooth transfer, admittedly one that is fraught with all sorts of difficulties, in that it's a pseudo landslide. And of course, they prefer not to recognize the pseudo bit. But what I desperately hope is, though, that there's all the fundamental facts that we've been talking about, that we are able to accommodate them within our own tradition. And again, traditions become a dirty word, and it's not. It's the thing that binds us to each other, that, as I said, that establishes losers' consent, but that also should show us why it matters. I mean, what I always do when I'm dealing with somebody, and when I'm dealing with myself, as much as anybody else, when I get depressed about the current state of our politics, which I do quite often, I will go to somewhere like Westminster Abbey, and I'll walk round there, and I'll sometimes stand and listen. I'll go and read the inscriptions. I'll go and look at what is there. And it is, the Abbey in particular, is a record of an incomparable civilization that dwarfs even the achievement of Greece and Rome. And it's a product, I would argue, fundamentally of our politics. That doesn't mean that everything should be political, but it's the basis. Your political arrangements are the basis of your society, and we've lost sight of this. And again, it's an enormous undertaking of, as it were, making people feel that they own it again. That this awful alienation that's gone on, and it's a duty that falls on all those of us who've got the capacity, the talent, the access to forms of expression.
It's interesting actually, because you were talking about monarchy before, with King Charles and Prince William wanting to kind of be a modern monarchy and kind of
disastrous.
That's
utterly disastrous. Utterly. I mean, the idea of a modern monarchy is mad. And again, you know, I'm afraid the truth is, it's also mad when monarchy identifies with highly political causes. I mean, the whole, I mean, Charles, the idea that you wheel Charles out as chairman of COP, whatever it's called, the idea of Prince William, homelessness, when you've got about one palace per day of the week, you know, at least, and the sheer lack of awareness. I was shot down, and people got very cross with what I said at the time of the coronation. But the last coronation was a radical shift in every coronation since 1689, since the Glorious Revolution, because I think one of the things that's most striking, if one wants to put what we were attacking in the Blair changes from 1997 to 2010, they are in fact an explicit undoing of the constitutional settlement of 1689. That's what the whole way in which the law is transgressed onto politics and politics is transgressed into law. What was going on in 1689 was an attempt at separating the two, which seems to me to be the only healthy relationship between the two of them. But what also happened in 1689 was the explicit statement that the monarchy is a parliamentary monarchy. It is, the role of the monarch is fundamentally represented by the state opening of Parliament, which is why the monarch reads the speech and why there are the attendant peers and the Commons there. And do you know what? That was shown in 1689, and for every succeeding coronation, by the fact that all the House of Lords and all the House of Commons were represented, were actually there at the coronation. The Lords, of course, the central sort of, the kind of chorus in the Grand Opera, all dressed up in their red and white robes and whatever. And the House of Commons always placed in a huge gallery, usually directly overlooking the choir of the Abbey. So, as it were, the speaker was in the middle, up there. And do you know what King Charles did? He swept away the lot. And they he and Welby together deliberately removed any reference to political power from the coronation. And even things like, you know, the coronation is about the sanctification of political power. Now, I am not a Christian, but you need a sort of national myth. And the old days of the Church of England, I always called it, by being reasonable, as you said I was, I call it English Shinto. This is the English worshipping themselves, which has always seemed to me to be a very sensible thing to do in the person of the King Emperor. And that involved the great moments like the presentation of the sword of justice to the monarch. You are given this to punish the evil and to reward the good. All of that swept away. And you know what? You even invent a special ritual of the presentation of the glove. Well, the glove was presented, but there was never any kind of liturgy over it. Do you know what was written in at this point? Receive this glove, which is to make sure that the hand of justice is tender and does not hurt. I mean, but you literally look at how they've dealt with justice, letting the rapists and the thieves and the murderers out so as you could put political prisoners, because that's what they are in. And it's all there. It's appalling.
And it is the thing that binds us together, our traditions, our history,
That's right.
our monarchy.
What matters is we have been, because we have this entirely non-racial view of citizenship. But what it requires a commitment to those values which have enabled that to happen.
Yeah.
And what we've done instead is to come up with this imaginary notion of British citizenship, which I've described it elsewhere as a flag of convenience. There are apparently only two British values: tolerance.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
In other words, you can put up with any bloody thing, and diversity. In other words, we're nothing.
Yeah.
And you see, what is very striking, if you actually look, exactly the same sort of rhetoric has been applied in Canada under Trudeau. Canada used to be the country which, of course, distinguished itself absolutely sharply from America by saying we are monarchical. We represent not the break with Britain, which America did, but the continuity. And instead, there has been this absolute, deliberate, radical rupture and say, we're nothing.
But to take an optimistic note, that looks like it's coming to an end.
That comes to
actually, the Canadian Conservatives, I think, are in some considerable way a role model for what the British Conservatives need to adopt and adapt to, which is an unapologetically clear Conservative vision, which Pierre Poilievre has just been absolutely brilliant at. And he's not a demagogue at all, but he is incredibly lucid, to the point of being frequently witty, which I consider to be a benefit as well. And
again, look in America with Vance. And what I would hope is that after the madness of Trump, you there have clearly, I mean, Vance has got very powerful opinions, but he is witty, he is forceful, he is clear. In fact, listening to some of the American broadcasts, it strikes me in many ways absolutely how superior they are to ours, and that the degree of knowledge, the sheer ability to argue a point. There's a wonderful example of it, in which some idiot, I mean, so low level, from ITV asks a Republican spokesman, will Trump accept the result? Young man, we are talking about a situation in which, if you had been listening to me, it is very likely that President Trump will win. Will he accept his victory? Probably. Then it goes on. Have you ever put this question to a Democrat? Have you ever put it to Hillary Clinton, who denied and denounced Trump's victory
and suggested it was based on Russian interference,
but it was magnificent, and he had rhetorical command. He had all the facts at his fingertips, and you had this floundering. You like it. He was a rather spotty young man. British journalist. It was wonderful. It was one of those moments that the old teacher in you comes out. You have a student like that, and every so often you lose your inhibitions. And I am just going to tear you apart. And it was wonderfully done. So I think we've got to acknowledge that we have a lot of learning to do.
Yeah.
And I think you're also implying, aren't you, David? We need to rediscover self-confidence.
We need to rediscover. That's the most important thing.
It's been a complete sort of the Conservatives in Britain have been apologists.
Yes.
We're
the nasty party.
The nasty party.
In other words, this self-doubt has penetrated the soul of conservatism. Again, a Conservative Prime Minister declares that he's the heir to Tony Blair. And it is jaw-dropping. Yeah. It is simply jaw-dropping. And perhaps we could just end on this note. Again, looking at my own experience with things like cancellation and all the rest of it, there seems to me to be one quality without which all the rest of them, however able, however, in both the good and bad sense of the word, endowed you are, unless you've got courage, it does not make any difference. We need courage. Good, conservative British courage.
Wow, I mean, that is a great place to end. Well, thank you so much, guys. That was amazing. I mean, we could listen to you all day.
You don't need the question.
Yeah, no,
I tell you.
Thank you so much, Mark. You were amazing, and David, you're amazing. Thank you so much. Please do come and join us anytime. And don't forget, everybody, tune into ModCon's Monday midday. You'll see some more amazing people like this.